Boom. We're live. Hey guys, we're here with the great. Yeah, we're going. Here with my co-host, team member, Ryan Cinecrisis, as always. And we have as a guest with us today, the great Jake Calta. And we're talking about Italian murder mystery slasher films today.
Indeed.
Commonly referred to as giallo, which is derived from the pulp novel tradition of Italy, in which these cheap sort of dime novels were printed on yellowish paper, and yellow in Italian is giallo. Correct? Did I accurately sum up?
Go ahead. You got it like 90% of the way there. The big thing with giallo is that, and just for those who want to know what all those random things next to my name are, I am a filmmaker, writer, composer, jack of all trades, master of hopefully a few, give or take. We'll figure that out in the next few years. But the big thing that I started out with was studying film as far back as I can remember. But anyway, now the thing with giallo is that it's specifically from a publication company, Il Giallo Mondadori, or something along those lines, where the covers themselves are actually bright yellow. And so the giallo is basically in reference to the covers themselves. But it's also technically not even just dime novels. Their big thing early on was actually translating a lot of the great English mystery writers, like Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, Agatha Christie, Edgar Wallace, and so on. And that kind of serves as the backbone of a lot of the very early gialli that get made in the 60s and 70s. There's very much a, sort of the classic murder mystery structure of a lot of really weird rich people in a lot of these films, having very sordid lifestyles, and just about every one of their grandmothers a red herring. But yeah, no, the giallo thing itself also has kind of a dual meaning. Because in Italy, it's a colloquialism for thrillers, as in any thriller is a giallo. So, Psycho's a giallo, Peeping Tom's a giallo, just about everything, everything in that thriller genre is considered giallo. And it wasn't until, a lot of people started looking over the trends in like Italian exploitation, where you get your Bavas, your Argentos, and your Fulcis that come up, that we start seeing giallo identified as a very specific trend in Italian exploitation.
So it's kind of like film noir, to where it was identified and categorized.
Yeah, it's very much something you kind of had to find critically, especially because the thing about Italian exploitation too is that at the time they were like making genres left and right. Hollywood was doing a lot of very popular biblical epics, some of them shot in Rome. Then you got a bunch of sword and sandal films, and peplum. Characters like Hercules, Maciste, spaghetti westerns come into the fore in the mid-60s, rolling into the 70s, and the giallo kind of picks up at the top of the 70s once it breaks big with the earliest film of our four, Bird of the Crystal Plumage. But I also want to just say one other funny thing about this to kind of lay the rest of the groundwork, and this also does tie into Bird of the Crystal Plumage as well, is that in West Germany, there was a very weirdly niche thing that was happening called the Krimi, which was something of a similar wave of murder mystery films, but they were shot in black and white, and they were almost universally based around the work of Edgar Wallace. I don't know how, when it exactly it caught on, but essentially you have his works getting really big over in West Germany. And I can't remember if it was Rialto or the very early version of Constantine Films. Like one of the early German production companies just started firing out these films, a lot of them made by the exact same director. I think it's Alfred Voher. I think that's how I pronounce his name. And it's literally just Edgar Wallace adaptations. Anything Edgar Wallace, and all of a sudden just became this craze. And you have a bunch of studios being like, okay, we've gone through all the Edgar Wallace stories. Fuck it, grab his son stuff, Brian Edgar Wallace. And a lot of and the thing is, it's not really like this becomes a major influence on the giallo necessarily, but it's this similar wave of murder mystery mania, but then influences how some of these Italian films are brought into West Germany. Some films are retroactively christened Edgar Wallace adaptations. Bird of the Crystal Plumage was one of those films, in fact. Because it was
I noticed that at the credits. Yeah, and I was gonna say I'm not that familiar with Edgar Wallace beyond his contributions to King Kong. Ryan, I know you're an old school folk guy. Are you familiar with any Edgar Wallace mystery stories?
Not that I can recall off the top of my head, no.
Okay.
I've been working, yeah, and I've been working on curating a piece of like public domain, like a collection of public domain short stories, and so I've been kind of thumbing through some of the stuff he was doing in the 1910s and 20s. But I haven't really read up on a lot of Edgar Wallace's stuff, but I know that there was a bit of a craze. People were on a bit of a kick with him because there was also a bit of a there was a British TV anthology, like an Edgar Wallace theater type thing, where they were adapting stories
Really?
like that. And they were also, towards the end, drafting in random B movies to fill out the roster. Stuff like Jerry Anderson's first film, Crossroads to Crime, oddly enough. And really weird esoteric shit like that. They were like, do we have a crime film? Does it look vaguely like The Saint, but without Roger Moore? Fuck it, bring it in here. We'll call it an Edgar Wallace theater production. I don't know what it was, but yeah, and I don't know what it was about Edgar Wallace, but for some reason, shuffling back to West Germany, it just caught on, and it was a substantial enough phenomenon that there were filmmakers later on in like the 2000s. I think someone made a parody film of the creamy thing, done in black and white, done in like the 2:35 aspect ratio, all the tropes and some similarities like black gloved killers and the kind of classic murder mystery, it could be anyone attitude to the suspect lineups kind of permeate a lot of those films. Yeah.
Can I ask you a question, Jake? So these are obviously murder mystery stories, but to me, it seems like when the Italians got a hold of them, they imbued them with a slasher element in the early 60s with something like probably the earliest giallo film I've seen is Blood and Black Lace, the Mario Bava film.
Yes.
Right. So there's like slasher elements there that would seem revolutionary and only make it over to America in a mainstream way in the late 70s. Was the slasher element and sort of the pickoff of beautiful women and these long extended sequences of like hunting down the hot girl, was that an Italian invention?
I'd say for more or less, yeah. But it also it kind of it kind of comes from the fact that, and this is something I just kind of noticed with Italian cinema in general, not just from the period, but specifically kind of the tone of it going throughout the mid-century, is that there's very much a willingness to just go the distance, go that one step beyond. And there actually was a earlier film from Bava, which was The Girl Who Knew Too Much, which many kind of see as the definitive beginning of the giallo. And the only reason why I didn't really start catching on was until Argento gave it that push with Bird's tremendous international success. But the slasher structure sort of thing, that I think kind of comes off of, I describe these films as very much an expressionist attitude. It's not necessarily concerned with incredibly deep three-dimensional characterizations, but it also isn't just, I'll put a couple of nice looking guiles in the picture and then we, stab them and then, blood and guts and all of. No, there's very clearly people throw around the term grand guignol. I think that does really apply to the giallo, that there is very much this theatricality to the murders, that there's a theatricality to the presentation. Bava himself being a cinematographer, literally, it's almost perfect the way those first two complement each other, because you have the one in black and white, which has all the classic high contrast stylings that were coming out of film noir. And in many ways, I don't remember if it received distribution in West Germany, but I'm sure it would have slipped cleanly into the creamy craze at the time. And then you move over to Blood and Black Lace, which is a fountain of color. It's a
beautiful movie,
delirious looking. And the greatest thing too is the fact that technically wasn't even 3-strip Technicolor, but it's about as bright as it too.
Sure, it's spectacular looking. Yeah.
Oh, it's seriously one of the most stunning pieces. And that's also kind of one of the nice things too, is that of course the genre would have to be spearheaded by the cinematographer, the man who can make just about anything look as beautiful as Bava did.
And that's something that like ties these movies together, is they all are great looking. I mean, think about what America was producing in terms of like boundary pushing horror at the time. What Herschel Gordon Lewis shit that looks like terrible, right?
Absolutely. I call those the C tier films because it's not even up to the level of B tier, because B tier at least implies there's some studio system there churning these out. Then you get down to Herschel Gordon Lewis's stuff where it's like, this man's making this shit on fucking pocket lint. My God.
Oh, for sure. How familiar are you guys with the Italian film industry beyond this genre? Because I'm not familiar with it at all.
I guess I'm coming in with all the cards on this one because I
Take it away,
don't
brother.
know a lot. I don't know a lot of the, like, you know, I haven't studied it, but you can kind of mark a lot of the trends in the industry. And I think there's actually a great quote from one of the later guys, Luigi Cozzi, who I'm trying to remember. Yeah, I think Luigi Cozzi is the guy who did stuff like Star Crash and a lot of the more campier stuff that was coming out in the late 70s and 80s. But he said this really great quote, something along the lines of, in Italy, they never ask you, what's your film like? They ask you what film your film is like. That there's always this idea that if anyone can smell a trend, that trend immediately gets capitalized on. And you see that. You genuinely see that in just about every wave. Peplum started because there were a lot of Hollywood studios shooting in Rome, shooting their biblical epics, Ben-Hur being one of the most famous, and you started getting films like Hercules. You started getting a revival of the Maciste character, which dates back to the silent era. He's kind of one of the earliest strongmen characters in Italian, you know, entertainment. Then once the giallo doesn't really take off until Argento gives it the final shove with Bird of the Crystal Plumage. But during the 60s, you have a wave of gothic horror that kind of starts out around the time Roger Corman's doing the Edgar Allan Poe cycle at AIP. So, like, almost perfectly in conjunction, actually, Mario Bava directs Black Sunday with Barbara Steele, which is kind of one of the big seminal gothic chillers of the era. And that same year, in 1960, Corman does House of Usher with Vincent Price. And so you have this kind of ushering in from both sides of the pond, this, you know, wave of that. And then, of course, when Leone breaks out the Dollars trilogy, you know, the rest of the 60s is all for the spaghetti Western. You've got Leone making his films, Corbucci doing, I believe Django came first. He later did. Corbucci was the one who did The Great Silence, right?
I would take your word for it. But
okay, well,
I was going to ask you: Have you seen Godard's Contempt that they filmed at Cinecittà Studios?
Yes, I have.
Yeah, and was that at the? Do you know? Was Cinecittà kind of on the way out at that point when he filmed it there, or was it? Is Cinecittà? I know it's sort of a museum now if you go to visit it, but
I think Cinecittà was sort of kind of in like a pulse keeping state. Because I know there were still films being shot there. I know there were still producers coming because you still had, you know, I believe Dino De Laurentiis was starting to really take off around this time. I know Carlo Ponti was still around at that time. So I'm sure there were always people coming up and shooting. I'm sure the sound stages were already, because that's the other thing too. The 60s and the 70s were really a big boom period for filmmaking in general. Because for sheer volume of films being made and people reusing sets, reusing costumes, it's almost a bit like, it is a bit like the AIP model, except almost extended out to like an entire country, sort of.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting point. And you say this with what this idea of trend chasing. That's why it's so fun and interesting to talk about these movies, because they're almost like they're very much in dialogue with each other. I watched Mario Bava's The Psychic. You ever seen that with Jennifer O'Neill?
That'd be Lucio Fulci.
Oh, sorry, Lucio Fulci. Yeah, Lucio Fulci, who also directed Don't Torture a Duckling. And at the beginning of the film, Jennifer O'Neill as a child, her vision of her mother falling off the rock and hitting her head on every way down is basically the exact same scene or sort of special effect as he employs in at the end of Don't Torture a Duckling. It's like they were trying to one-up themselves or continue to sort of like redo this plot over and over again until they got it right or one-up each other.
Exactly. And the thing also is, too, there's a lot of, everyone winds up connected in some way to the other guy in the end.
Yeah.
Mario Bava is sort of the godfather of the idea of the giallo, and also that idea of very hyper stylized, hyper colorful Italian horror. You know, without him, we would not have Argento Suspiria, and quite literally, we wouldn't have Inferno, because he was actually on as a special effects artist for Inferno.
Oh,
And
really?
Argento was also helping foster the career of his son Lamberto Bava, who did the Demons films in the 80s. And so you kind of have this sort of growing, almost like a mini version of the Corman. I keep going back to Corman, but in all fairness, American International was one of the big importers of a lot of the films in the 60s. They brought over most of Bava's pictures, and it was that relationship that got him drafted to do that sequel to Dr. Goldfoot with Vincent Price. But
have you seen that,
you know,
Ryan?
long and short of it,
Yeah, Dr. Goldfoot in the Bikini Machine. Is that the one you're talking about?
that was the first one. Then I think the second one was
the Girl Bombs.
And the girl, that was the one Bava was hired on, and not a fun time was had by anyone.
Well, let's talk about the movies we're going to discuss today. Right?
Exactly.
Jake, you picked all these movies out. And if you could briefly go through and name them and sort of in a brief way why you picked them. And I guess we could probably start with Crystal Plumage after you're done.
Yes, the Bird with the Crystal Plumage was the 1970 directorial debut of Dario Argento. And this first one I had picked because it essentially establishes not only just about every conceit Argento would go forward with in his career, having artists as protagonists, in this case a writer, his penchant for a very set piece style of structure where you kind of bounce back from investigation, murder, but also that commitment to the kind of theatricality that was established by Bava in those earlier works. And going into that then is Bay of Blood from 1971, which I picked because, one, anyone who has watched slashers from the 80s knows the story by heart. Set pieces from Bay of Blood were the inspiration for kills in Friday the 13th Part 2, directed by Steve Miner. But also, Bay of Blood is interesting as a body count picture because Bava takes it to a sort of black comedy of errors extreme, where there's not an innocent soul in the picture, and it gets absolutely so, the bodies pile up to such an extent that the ending is quite possibly the only ending that could be affixed to this film, because there's no way in hell you could look at the reality of this without asking, okay, no one's getting out of this alive, so you might as well not let them leave the film alive either.
Right.
And it's also just a testament to his kind of his ability to modulate his style, because it's not as colorful as Blood and Black Lace, and it doesn't really echo any of the gothic overtones of a lot of his earlier 60s work. Moving into Don't Torture a Duckling, and I'll just reveal this off the bat, I texted you guys last night that one of these films hit my top 100 of all time, and it was this film. And originally I'd picked it because obviously you have to get of the triumvirate Lucio Fulci, who most people remember for his kind of golden era of the late 70s into the 80s of making a lot of these very gruesome, grisly, surreal horror films like The Beyond, Zombie, House by the Cemetery, The New York Ripper. But not only did this come earlier when Lucio Fulci was more of a jack-of-all-trades workman, working in just about every genre, from westerns to sex comedies to... He literally started out his career making musicals in a small movement of late 50s rock and roll Italian movies like that. But it's the fact that here he's not as gory as he'd get later on. He's still brutal. But the genius of Don't Torture a Duckling is that its premise is very emotionally brutal, and that's kind of the reason why it became an all-timer for me last night, is that once you hit the final reel and you understand the motives and you have classic Italian poetry of the grisly with the idyllic in complete contrast with one another, it just came down on me like a fucking sledgehammer. And that's after impeccable piece of filmmaking after impeccable piece of filmmaking, proving Fulci as a really rock solid craftsman. And lastly, I picked Torso as sort of the official coming of the proto slasher. And I mean, it literally slots in perfectly. It came out a year before Black Christmas, about 5 before Halloween. And yet, so many modern exploitation filmmakers, Eli Roth, for those who own the Blue Underground release, Eli Roth did the introduction for that. And he actually got one of the actors from the film, the guy who played the doctor, I believe, as a cameo in the second Hostel. But really, really, Torso is essentially the first honest to God's truth slasher. And I joked about this in a review I wrote about it where I said this did play better as a horny teenager. Because
you
have
oh god, it's by far the most there's the most
it is the most sexed up film of the lot. And no joke, I had to like take a pit stop after watching, because I was watching these in order to kind of see the evolution of the genre. And so I had to take like a fucking last night I was like, okay, Don't Torture a Duckling is the fuck I need a cigarette film of the giallo genre. How the fuck am I going to go into Torso after this? So I like took an hour, relaxed, breathed, and then went right into it. But Torso.
You watched all these in one day? You watched all these in one day?
I split them across 2 evenings.
Okay. I was gonna say, like, man, that's a little
kind of a drive. So like 2 trips to the drive-in rather.
Okay, see, Jake, when you said you had to take a pit stop, I didn't know what the hell you were talking about. I thought you put the TV on pause in this particular shot, and we're taking a little break. You know what I'm saying? I didn't know, but
the problem is with Torso, you don't need to pause. You just need to let it run on long enough, and you'll hit the next scene.
That was sort of like shocking to me. And you know what? By the way, Jake, I talked about my plane ride before we were over here. I put Torso on. I'm like, I'll get these done on the plane. And I had that rolling, and I was like, fuck no. You know, I was like, nah, I can't be doing this shit.
I warned you about that.
People
pulling the William Peterson and Manhunter move of, I'll just leave my crime scene photos for this little girl to look at.
That's exactly. Yeah, that was I didn't want to be put in, airplane jail, which I've heard exists. So Ryan, we'll let you roll here a little bit. If we start off first with Girl with the Crystal Plumage, what did you think of it, man?
Yeah, this one I really, really liked. I'm glad that I watched this one first, because although I liked all 4 of the movies that we're going to be discussing today, this one I felt I had the strongest affinity towards. I don't know if it's because of Dario Argento, I think appeals to me the most out of all 4 of the filmmakers. There's something more familiar, perhaps, about in regards to the way it's made or directed that feels more similar to American films. More or less, I got serious Halloween vibes from it, not in terms of the content, but the way it looks and feels to me, the way that the generalized story was structured in terms of how Carpenter makes a movie. Everything that I saw in the movie really, I guess, hit hard in what my predetermined notions about what this genre entails. You know what I mean? Like, everything that I thought the genre was going to be, this movie exemplified those characteristics. So, for instance, even when the movie begins, we start with a unknown figure decked out in all black leather trench coat, black leather gloves, a hat, brim hat, at a typewriter, writing some mysterious message that, for all I can recall in the movie, has nothing to do with anything. Maybe he's actually sending that to some victim, but like, it's totally meaningless in the end. To me, that plus
didn't he send it to the newspaper?
I don't even remember who. I watched the movie twice, and I can't for the life of me, I cannot figure out who this letter was meant for or what, and what relationship that victim had to anyone else. Please feel free to elaborate if you know. Right. But anyway, that plus the way that the story is constructed, in that we are given a character to follow throughout the entire movie. Our protagonist, the American writer who is visiting Italy. So therefore, we already have a character that is perhaps more relatable to us as American audiences, a rather handsome young man with a beautiful, attractive young girlfriend who then gets caught up into the world of this mystery, this murder mystery, and he witnesses the attempted murder in a very beautifully constructed art gallery that mimics what essentially looks like a painting in and of itself through the way the doors are constructed. And then he takes it upon himself to do the job the police cannot do, to solve the mystery, more so because I think it's interesting because I thought they were going to do a thing where he was implicated as the suspect, and they immediately throw that out. And I was actually very pleased about that, because I thought that was going to be a contrivance for the plot to be like, hey, we suspect you even though there's no reason to, and you need to prove yourself as the innocent person. They don't do that. But it leads down this pathway of a very interesting mystery that I don't know that 100% the explanation, all of the explanations for all these movies have some weird psychosexual implication behind it, and that's fine. But even if it's a little stretched, that's probably what appealed to me the most.
I'll tell you, you mentioned the scene, probably the best scene of the film is when our main character witnesses to what looks to him like a murder in progress between a beautiful woman and a man in black in an art gallery. Yeah. Which, by the way, I'm just going to weave here for a sec. The great thing about I don't think I can do it, the pronunciation with as much gusto, Jake, as you, and actually I'm a little disappointed in Ryan because he actually is Italian. I haven't heard a good giallo pronunciation from him yet. But giallo, so like the giallo film, if you're looking at it from the American's perspective, it's sort of a proto-slasher, right? If you're going to be an American-centric sort of head watching these. And the thing I appreciate so much about them is that they're always like so glamorous. Do you know what I mean? In America, the slasher, go ahead.
No, absolutely. Because it's just, there was one type of film that I kind of omitted. Like, I could have picked a dozen different Sergio Martino films, but I specifically chose Torso because there actually is, if you want to learn what a house giallo film looks like, it's always about the private lives of the upper middle class to the nouveau riche. It's always in as Mediterranean as all get out, glamorous fashions. The musical score is always somewhere between lounge jazz and Baroque pop. Literally, almost every composer, if they don't have a similar style of melody, almost everyone's writing with a similar style of orchestration. It becomes like a house style for the genre. And the interesting thing about these four in particular is that they all represent a certain element of it, but they don't all represent the formula in and of themselves. They have components that would later become kind of the bog standard. Oh, go watch The Case of the Scorpion's Tail. You have scenes set on, a nice island, or you have this, all this trend-setting fashion. But yeah, the nice thing about Bird of the Crystal Plumage is that not only do you have some of that summariness in Ennio Morricone's music, but that really hyper-modern look in like the art gallery and in the art direction and the production design.
And I would hesitate to shoot from the hip here and be a cultural anthropologist here in Italy, which I know next to nothing about. But I would venture a guess, based on watching some of these films and comparing them to American slashers, is that in America, the slasher film is sort of a low-class coded, lower middle-class pursuit, right? It's a teenage drive-in, take your girlfriend. It's kind of gross and gruesome, but it's about, hey, what can you handle, right? Whereas in Italy, I feel like this is perhaps a more avant-garde like thing. Do you know what I'm saying?
Absolutely. And I think this also goes back to its origins more with the murder mystery genre, because again, Agatha Christie isn't writing about how some poor schlub at the workhouse, clubbed his old lady to death. No, she's writing about all these strange eccentrics on a train across the continent, or she's writing about, people in the manor, all these strange socialites and stuff like that. So it's
does that generalization hold though? Does that generalization hold? Because like when you talk about most of these, yes, they are in a cosmopolitan area where people are, more higher end individuals. But then when you have a rural setting like in Duckling, do you really find the people very glamorous besides the one oddball character there?
Well, that's my point though, is that these these four, they're all different elements of the formula, but none represent the house style in totality. Not even Argento's technically, because when you mentioned Halloween, there actually is a bit of an autumnal sort of atmosphere when the fog comes out.
Yeah.
And I actually, okay, this is how much I love, I just blew my mind when I sat down and realized when I was watching the film and I was looking at the design of it, Vittorio Storaro, which by the way, that is Vittorio Apocalypse Now Storaro as DP.
Yeah, dude.
And he actually lensed a bunch of really good looking gialli from this boom period. If anyone wants any homework after this, go watch The Fifth Chord from 1971 with Franco Nero. It looks gorgeous. But between the kind of bell, pitched percussion elements of Morricone's score, I'm sitting here watching this thinking, God, I guess Argento really liked Clute. And then I realized Clute came out the next year.
Oh, really? What made you think Clute? Are you talking in terms of just like thematic, or are you talking about cinematography?
Genuinely, the visual tone of it, the way Gordon Willis uses light and shade. I mean, we call him the Prince of Darkness after all. And Vittorio Storaro has very much been public about his philosophy of contrast. And you see that all throughout the film, especially that magnificent shot in the final act where Tony Masanti busts through the door into the gallery, and it's just this one block of light in a full Panavision frame of black.
That is sick. I think Clute looks like ass. Like, no offense. I mean, am I wrong? I think Clute is a terrible.
I think it was very well. It was early. It was early on. It was kind of early on in a lot of things. Like obviously this wouldn't be, and obviously Willis's camera work on stuff like The Godfather, beats it black and blue. Obviously.
Have you guys seen? Go ahead.
No, but it was just kind of the general ambience of it, I guess. For like, here's also the thing too. I look at a lot of these with kind of, obviously there's the hard and fast stuff. What's happening at the script level? What's happening with performances? What's happening in the direction? But my mind, whenever I'm watching these films, there's always some element of ephemera that I get caught on. Yeah. And for some reason, the kind of ephemera came to mind was Clute, and it was specifically those opening cues from Michael Small's score that are very low, ambient, kind of glassy, that I also may be getting mixed up with some of the music from When a Stranger Calls. But then again, that's the problem of being this talking encyclopedia.
I don't remember Clute as well, perhaps, but what I do remember from Clute is just like the climax where we have like a 50 millimeter lens jammed in like Donald Sutherland's face, and you can't see shit. And there's
I know what you mean. That was not what came to mind.
Okay, all right. Well, I'm just curious. Have you guys ever seen Gordon Willis's movie that he directed, Windows, with Talia Shire?
I am a bit of a fan, sort of. I mean, it's not
one of the most beautiful, most boring fucking movies you've ever seen. It's a great looking movie. It's so goddamn right?
Honestly, yeah. And the only thing that kind of keeps the what tension is kept there is really on account of one, Talia Shire selling everything about her character. I forgot who plays
the lesbian murderer, obsessed lesbian killer. Yeah,
was it Elizabeth Ashley? I think it is.
You got it, dude. You're a human film database over here.
I plug me in. You'll get everything you need. You don't even need IMDb anymore, guys. I'm literally here for it. No, but I mean, those two performances, Willis's camera work, and Ennio Morricone. Throw a stone, hit a Morricone soundtrack. Those things kind of all come together for me. But it's also not like, oh, it's a lost masterpiece. I wish he had directed more. He could have found his footing. But it also kind of got on. Windows was a victim of Heaven's Gate again, like everything is in 1980. United Artists, Michael Cimino. You can add Windows by Gordon Willis to that, death count. It's like visiting Arlington, but for like auteur filmmaking.
To piggyback off one of the other things you mentioned, George, about this being kind of an avant-garde genre, I don't know if that's necessarily 100% true in terms of like from what I was listening to on some of the special features and audio commentaries for these, is that these were supposed to be like almost like a communal, a thing that the community experienced at the theater. Apparently, these were very popular where people in local theaters would go literally almost every night to the cinema and watch different ones of different giallo films. And they would basically just be there to hang out and talk and chit chat in the theater as a disposable form of entertainment. And then, pay attention only when either some nude scene came on or a kill scene came on.
Well, I mean,
so
really?
I think maybe in retrospect afterwards, people started realizing that there was something more to the genre than
I find that hard to understand, because for me, the thing that makes these superior, I think, to a lot of American slasher films, despite, I'll use your word, ephemera of like late 70s, early 80s, like,
American. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, nostalgia, which is like, oh, this is great. But like, I like that there's a mystery element to these movies, to where like, honestly, like during Bay of Blood, when the kids are running around and romping around the abandoned hotel, I'm just like,
yeah,
boring. I'm like, let's get to the intrigue. Like, what's going on with this this old lady's will? I want to get back to the story. So the fact that this is sort of like a joke hangout for Italians, I guess that's it's striking.
And that's what I don't get either, is because if you don't pay attention to what's going on in these movies, you don't know, you won't even remember that you watched it.
Exactly.
Okay, so I had to watch some of these like twice, because if you stop paying attention for like 2 minutes, you're like, did I even watch them? Like, what happened? Who are these people? Half the people look interchangeable. You can't remember which guy is which. You're like, oh, is that the doctor or is that the
well, that's because you're racist against Italians.
And you're like, who? What?
Yeah, that's because you're. No, I would say this: the men do tend to look sort of similar.
Yes, the men all.
There
look
is
the same.
no joke. When I was watching Torso, the guy who played the doctor, who tends to Susie Kendall later on. I'm not joking. For 5 seconds, I'm thinking, oh shit, I didn't realize Ivan Razumov was in this, because Ivan Razumov's in like Strange Vice of Mrs. Ward. I think he has a part in Your Vice is a Locked Room and Only I Have the Key, another Martino film. And then I'm like, oh wait, it's not him at all. There's no Ivan Razumov in this film. But to get to your point though, I think in all honesty, that is kind of part of the glut of films that were being made in Italy for the entertainment market, full stop. Because you got to remember, it wasn't just the giallo. They were doing this at spaghetti westerns. They were doing this at the poliziotteschi, which basically, to go back to if there's a trend, the Italians will jump on it. When French Connection was a major hit, right around the same time as the giallo started breaking out, you started getting directors like Fernando De Leo, who said, okay, let's do some hard-hitting Italian crime stuff that isn't all, Godfathers and mafia stuff, but more street-level crime like that. So I'm not surprised one bit, but I also think they're still being made with a level of craftsmanship, because a lot of these guys have worked in... There's very much an exchange between the art house and the Cineplex happening all the time. I think there's no greater example of this divide being crossed than to go over to a different filmmaker, Jesus Franco, who many people know for, all these skin flicks, all these bizarre surrealist horror films. He did stuff like Venus in Furs with the late James Darren. Did films like Faceless, which is like a who's who of people who are past their prime. But one of his earliest gigs was as an assistant director to Orson Welles on Chimes at Midnight. Jess Franco, sovereign chief of schlock in Europe, like the Euro sleaze king, started with Orson Welles and Shakespeare. So, and I know that, and I know there's that exchange that happens with, I can't remember who exactly, because I know Fellini has some conversations with some of the guys doing a lot of the yeoman work. I know I don't know if Antonioni did. I know Leone was basically in the trenches with them for all intents and purposes because of what he was doing with the spaghetti western. But, there is a bit of that constant exchange. And the fact is, they were in a golden age. So many films were being made at the same time and filling so many different roles in the market. Obviously, they were making it to cash in on exports to America and to the wider international audience. But the simple fact of the matter is, with so many of these films being made, I'm not surprised that they were being treated, the same as like dime novels, where it's like you read it, it's like, oh, sweet, that's neat. And then it collects dust on your shelves for like the next 5 decades, or it gets,
Right.
sent to Goodwill afterwards. I'm not surprised one bit, because when you have that much, not even gold, that much just decent fucking cinema happening, I'm not surprised if they would literally just show up and just, treat it like, literally Monday football. I'm not surprised
right.
one bit. But to get back to Bird with the Crystal Plumage,
Right.
I think what makes this, I described this as everything right and wrong about this film can be summed up in it's Dario Argento's directorial debut. He had started out doing critic work and then moved into screenwriting. Speaking of, collaboration and interrelations, he was one of the guys who originally worked on the story treatments for Once Upon a Time in the West with, of all people, Bertolucci. So you have, Dario, king of Italian horror, Argento, and then Bernardo, the conformist Bertolucci, Last Tango in Paris and all that. So there's this constant interchange happening there as well. But he didn't, he had been writing for a bunch of films, and it wasn't until, obviously he tapped Dad on the shoulder and said, "Hey, Papa, can I make a movie?" Because I believe is.
No, I'm with you, and that's kind of the story with like a lot of these Italian guys, like with who's the big Italian? I'm talking about King Kong.
De Laurentiis.
De Laurentiis. It was very much a family operation, right? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because Raffaello,
family operation too, correct? His father was a producer or financier or something like that.
Yeah, because I believe Salvatore was at I believe it was was it Titus? I can't remember the name of the studio that's at the front of
Titanus. Yeah.
Titanus, there we go. Because I know Salvatore was a producer and financier. I know his brother, I believe, is Claudio Argento, who would later go on to not just, work with his brother routinely and help him out with the kind of community he was fostering with Michele Soavi, with like the church and the sect, and also Lamberto Bava and the Demons films. But he also would go on to do Sante Sangre with Jodorowsky, I believe. I believe that was Claudio Argento who helped with that. But yeah, so there's a big not even a nepo baby thing. It's more of just kind of it's like the Coppolas. It's a classic family operation. Yeah, it's like an empire of filmmakers. And hell, that even goes back to Bava, because I believe his father was a camera operator, like from the silent age into the talking age. And he obviously started out then as cinematographer and then of course his son Lamberto became a director and writer as well. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of kind of family lineage stuff happening there.
I'll tell you, Ryan, you mentioned that Argento seemed to you to be the person that like struck more of a chord and seemed more relatable. And I think it's partly because Argento, to me, it seems, out of all the films we watched, but of some of the periphery knowledge I have, he's a guy that actually encourages you to identify with a protagonist. If you're a voyeur, you're a voyeur from a good guy, right? I mean, we talked about Bay of Blood. It's an absolute free-for-all, very nihilistic, right? When I was watching Torso, I was under the impression that the redhead, Danny, was going to be our lead character. You're kind of like adrift as to who is supposed to be the lead. And if you identify with anybody, it's the POV of the killer, right? And Argento puts you in the shoes of a relatable protagonist, whereas these other guys do not, for the most part.
And also the plot, the mystery plot is very strong in that movie. I think you might disagree, but I think it was even stronger than in Don't Torture a Duckling, which has a great mystery element to it, great story and all that. But this one felt very much like, I want to really find out what's going on. So he has closure himself to figure out what
I think the secret to Bird's success there is that it has that pointed focus, is that there is a protagonist. I didn't mind the kind of ensemble structure of Don't Torture a Duckling, just because it becomes almost less of the mystery, and then it kind of becomes the machinations of seeing how this crime spree is affecting the people of this village, is affecting the various the various suspects. And the difference too is that both Bay of Blood and Duckling are kind of free-for-alls in the sense that there are no real heroes per se, or there are no strong personalities you're kind of gravitating around. You're kind of checking in on different points in, the machinations of plot. Whereas with Bird, it is very focused in, you have this protagonist who's thrown way in over his head and is constantly being attacked left, right, and center. Christ, they even got the assassin from The Man Who Knew Too Much. They got, because I believe that was Reggie.
Really, the guy who with the yellow coat?
Yes, that is the man from the assassin from the famous Stormcloud Cantata.
The Jimmy Stewart version? Who kills the guy in the crowd? Oh.
Literally, I was sitting there thinking, Christ, I've seen this man's face before when I first watched it. And then when I looked it up, I'm like, oh, that's where.
Wow. You got a hell of a
Yeah.
memory, brother.
Also, I think the urban setting gives it another level of sophistication that makes it much more interesting visually to look at too. I mean, look at the art gallery as this little like oasis and island of white light in an otherwise desolate black street that he sees almost as like a vision of unreality as he's walking, happens to be walking by and gets caught up in all this. And then you mentioned the other scene where he re-enters the gallery at the end of the movie, unbeknownst to him, and it's
perfect circular loop.
Yeah, yes,
exactly. And the thing also is that's it sets the pace of a lot of what he'd do later on, because I think the reason why also it works so great as an archetypical giallo is because so many of the things that would become fascinations of the genre would also become fascinations of Argento. Specific things like protagonists who are trying to recall the exact memory that holds the key to solving the mystery. That is right there in the outset in Bird of the Crystal Plumage. Similarly, the thing also about Argento is that there's always a uniform vision for the production in terms, like right down to color palette. Like I've literally sat down and I can tell you what the palettes. It's almost like watching a painter ply his craft. I can tell you almost exactly the color and the timbre of each film. And part of the reason why I initially was thinking about Clute is because I always associate a good chunk of it as a very cold, chilly kind of, elements of it are very kind of cold and chilly. And the thing is, this isn't going to be the last time Argento does that, because he'd later do the very same thing with Tenebrae in 1982, but pushed to like this pseudo-futurist extreme. Or, similarly, Deep Red, if you actually sit down and notice it, it's almost there in the title. It's a very warm film. There aren't really a lot of blues. There aren't really a lot of, cool colors.
Do you like my Suspiria reference with my lights?
Honestly, yes.
Red, right? Yeah. No,
very stylish. Very
yeah.
But yeah, and so, so much of what, because the thing also is Argento would essentially become the final torchbearer for the genre, because the thing about the Italian exploitation industry is that the come down happened towards the end of the 80s and rolling into the 90s. And it's just kind of this, the money's all drying up, basically, where, there was the big boom in blockbusters from America, which is obviously taking a slice out of the pie. And no matter how many ripoffs you do of, Terminator or this or that or the other, you just can't compete with the sheer juggernaut quality of a lot of these American exports that are coming into Italy. But generally speaking, I think it's just the structures of it, the ancient structures of the industry going down with it. But the only guy who really kind of, although obviously people have, people will say, oh, he started falling off after opera in 87. His mid-period stuff in the 90s is still good. And then, of course, people are like very iffy on everything from after Sleepless in 2001. But the fact of the matter is, the only man making gialli, when all was said and done, was Argento after the genre's boom period. He was the man who, even after having a decent international success with Suspiria, and slightly less so with Inferno, he came back to the giallo genre at a time when it wasn't really that popular at all. Like, him and Fulci basically brought the house down on it with Tenebrae and New York Ripper both coming out in 82. But yeah, everything that would go and kind of inform his career is there in Bird with the Crystal Plumage. It's almost this, it's like a manifesto for Dario Argento, the auteur. And it's one of the reasons why it does still hold up immensely, even though I feel there are certain lulls in pace. And one of the other things that kind of haunts him throughout his career is hit and miss humor. Here, there are some fantastic lines. I told you, Ursula Andress goes with the transvestites, not the perverts. I should hope so. Fucking fantastic. 10 out of 10. Best line. But, you know, it doesn't always land, like with a lot of his attempts at humor later on. But even still, it's like everything this man would be about for the next 40, 50 years of his life is there. Perfectly laid there. And you see how it kind of evolves and changes and has elements added and subtracted in various efforts.
I was going to say, what about a lot of the motivations behind the perpetrators in these movies are outlandish and or absolutely ridiculous, to say the least. I would say, do you think that this one in Crystal Plumage was probably the least preposterous? Well, I'd say Bay of Blood is the least preposterous. That's purely based on greed, property.
The least preposterous? Bay of Blood?
The motivation of the killer was to
I thought you meant when the two kids kill their parents.
No. I'm not saying the ending. I'm saying the motivation of the killer, because that is purely a profit-based motive. These other ones are all these weird psychosexual motivations. This one,
well, I mean, this is from a time before everyone thought the ending of Psycho was bad. Back then, they were like, "Oh, that's dope." Like they explained why
this was
crazy.
like the ending of Psycho on steroids here.
Not even just that, but also in fairness to White Knight for Don't Torture a Duckling for a bit. The interesting part of that is that it technically, while it is psychosexual in nature, it's about a preservation of purity. So at least, even though obviously the man's a cracked actor, for lack of better words. He's gone completely off the deep end. It's a complete perversion of the idea of the priest as father figure as guardian. I don't see that necessarily as outlandish just because you can tell what the emotional motive of it was. And again, it's kind of the reason why that finale kind of brought the hammer down on the film for me. But Bird with the Crystal Plumage kind of suffers from the issue of it's probably one of the more plausible, one of the more realistic. And that kind of follows a lot of the film, because a lot of the film tries to use then cutting edge ideas of forensics, reconstructing criminal profiles and stuff like that. But at the same time, it kind of does ring a little, it rings a little hollow, not necessarily because it doesn't make sense or it doesn't click, but simply because it does lack that Grand Guignol finish Argento became known for, where killers go out in these utter blazes of glory. I mean, even Cow Nine Tails, I won't spoil who gets it, but the great part of that film's finale is literally someone thrown down an elevator shaft, clinging to the rails, hands burning with smoke, breaking their legs on the top of the fucking elevator. Even in what is regarded as one of his weaker films, you get a finisher like that. Whereas here, she gets judo chopped on the back of the head, and then we get the psychoanalysis at the end.
Or like the Phenomenon, which has an ending where I almost threw up when they have that like pool full of dead body parts.
Oh God, it's like,
and it's like if pulls his hand out of the fucking handcuff. It's just like, oh my God, right?
It's wretched. It's fucking wretched.
It really is.
But it's interesting you brought up the forensics aspect of the movie, because that's actually a really interesting point. They go through this entire elaborate scene about the modern supercomputer, which is going to replace human detectives in terms of finding our perpetrator. And it's like it's a complete joke. Maybe that's an allusion back to what you were saying about his sense of humor.
I think that's very much a piece. There's a reason why a lot of people, and I don't always fully agree with it, but there's a reason why a lot of people call Argento the Italian Hitchcock. And it's a film like Bird with the Crystal Plumage. That idea of Hitchcockian irony, that idea of these moments of, these sly moments of humor, as well as his very, very good handle on building and generating suspense. And also that very good handle of what to show and what to pull back on. the kill in the bedroom where the blade goes down to the hoo-ha, you don't see it, but it's like Texas Chainsaw. You know it happened, and you're like squirming at the fucking thought.
It's
That's
brutal.
his genius. Absolutely.
Absolutely. I just want to pause here real quick to say thank you, Zarathustra Z Knob, for our first ever super chat. $2.
Canadian dollars, I think, right?
No, thank you, brother. That's really awesome.
There you go.
Canadian dollars? Oh, it is $2 Canadian. Let me check the conversion.
I'm happy to be part of this christening of the Film Journal channel.
We might get $2.12 out of this guy. Okay.
Also,
I'm officially the cash cow.
The end of the movie. After the long psycho-style explanation about the killer's motivation, they're then showing curious shots of the main character's girlfriend on the plane going home to the United States. And are they implying, or I guess it's up to the viewer to make this decision, are they implying that this girl will also have a similar fate as our killer in the movie because she has suffered a similar traumatic incident, which led to the killer's spree?
That's an interesting interpretation of it. I hadn't thought of that yet, because the only other time I thought about that kind of a on the plane ending was actually that is a good analogy to that kind of an idea. I fucking love Alice, Sweet Alice, by the way. It is one of my favorite horror films, absolutely. But that idea, because the only other time I ever thought of, whenever we get like a plane ending, the other time I think about that is in a Umberto Lenzi film, So Sweet, So Perverse, which essentially ends with a kind of sort of the, I will find you moment, where someone, is basically, you have someone keeping an eye on the perpetrator of X crime. And that's an interesting read of that finale. I think some of it might also just be pure rhythmic, like kind of keeping you in suspense of, okay, what's happened to Sam? What's happened to Sam? Oh, Sam's on the plane, happy ending. They all get to leave. And of course, you have that sort of, again, that nice bit of irony where it says, come to Italy, nothing happens here.
Right.
That just 90 minutes of nothing happening was what we've all experienced.
I think
the commentary also talks about this theme of the impotent lead character in a lot of these giallo films. That Sam is supposed to be like an impotent male, not just in terms of his relationship, but also in terms of his inability to, solve the mystery. Did you buy into that or not? I don't really.
They were doing it. They were having sex, weren't they?
Yeah, but there's again implication that there's trouble there. Not
and that he has to regain his
the thing is, I think the impotence thing probably holds a bit more sway in something like Torso, but then again, that's just because it's a very literal case application. I think it's more of, I don't really see that in Birth of Crystal Plumage, because I don't think it's really reaching for that level, because it's very clear that Susie Kendall and Tony DeSantis characters have a perfectly healthy relationship. Their only problem is that at first it's just, oh shit, I witnessed, I'm a witness, so they got me here for a bit longer than we were expecting. She takes it in stride. But the more they get deeper into the mystery and into, attempts on their life, then she's beginning to get, freaked out, as anyone else would. And because it starts going down that trail of, kind of, and she gets that terrific set piece where the killer tries to knock her off in their apartment, which is,
a great scene.
Oh my God, insane tension from that scene. Utterly insane. And the fact that they have
the eye hole, creating a peephole with,
And of course, perfect lens flare of the blade as it finally comes through. Oh, terrific. I don't really see the impotence angle there, though, just because
I didn't buy into it myself. I was just listening to a lot of the commentary tracks by some of these people, and it's like they're like, "Oh, this is a very common trend in these," and I'm like, I don't.
I think if anything, and this is just this is part of the issue of reconstructing genres through critical analysis, is that sometimes you start looking for trends and looking for, allusions and ideas that simply are an interpretation, but are largely an incident. And I think, a lot of people obviously try to do all this. People have, try to interpret, Don't Torture a Duckling as, say like anti-Catholic. And while there is sort of this dance between religion, superstition, and, cold reality, Fulci himself kind of, described himself as, troubled, afflicted, in short, your average Catholic. So he still considered himself a man of religion, but he had issues with the organization of it. And it's less in like an affront to God, but more like the corruption of these institutions, which goes into a lot of other, political angles on his work.
It occurred to me while watching Torso and Don't Torture a Duckling too, how often the killer is this sort of angelic, almost virginal kind of presence, right? Yeah. It's kind of like how Carpenter painted Michael Myers, in the first Halloween film, right? As a sort of like childlike character. I mean, it's the professor in Torso, correct? Right? And he's the professor, seems to be everybody that sort of seems upstanding ends up being kind of the freakiest. Right.
Very subtle clues to that reveal, though. Like, I don't know, just weird. I'm sorry, not to go jump to the next movie, but like Torso, when she tells him, "Oh, you have the most beautiful eyes when you're not wearing your glasses," and he says, "Don't say cruel things to me." And it's like, what? Like what?
Right.
Like, and it's just there's something wrong there. Like,
I think that might have been lost in translation a little bit, but
it is because there are certain terms of. There are certain terms of phrases, and there's also things that I kind of like. As interesting fact, Don't Torture a Duckling was the only of the 4 films that never had an international or English language, release, because it got a very limited release in Italy, but because of, the allegations of, anti-Catholicism and everything, it basically was, limited run. They made an English dub, so it's available for home video, but they never released it internationally. So that was the only film I wound up watching in Italian.
Same. I watched that one.
I watched Torso in Italian too. But
Torso, there's like 4 versions on my disc, and you can watch one with English, one with half English, half Italian, the other one with Swahili. I don't know. You could do everything with that movie.
Oh yeah.
Interesting. The interesting thing, though, when you mention that childlike element, though, is the fact that Mark Perel, who played the priest in Don't Torture a Duckling, was only 23 when he played that role. So he was young. He was a literal young adult. He was a literal young adult. And his story is a bit of a tragic one because he had died of a heroin overdose at 35 in the early 80s. But it's like, man had chops. He really did. And that performance is one of the standouts alongside like Florinda Balkan. But I want to do this in chronological order. So
what's our next movie?
Bay of Blood.
Any closing comments on the bird?
Well, that's also the thing I was going to say.
You didn't really talk.
I was going to say another thing about the Argento thing is it occurred to me that a lot of his protagonists are also tourists, which I think as a foreign viewer allows you to kind of get. I mean, what the writer in Tenebrae is in a hotel the whole time. He's a tourist.
He's an American author who has this very popular edition in Italy. Yeah,
going to the German ballet school. Jennifer Connelly is kind of she's American and
I believe she's American. Yeah, because her name's I believe it's like Jennifer Simpson or something like that.
I don't remember the main gal from Inferno. What was she doing?
She was. Oh, I know you're talking about. Well, the thing is that was actually largely set in New York. So it wasn't even like it's a foreigner thing. No, it's all actually happening in this surrealist version of New York.
Feel like it, but you know what I mean? It feels like it's happening in like the back room of the Suspiria, school. Right. I like Inferno though. But I think that allows you to sort of latch on, but like also this idea of like impotence in men and protagonists. It's like, how do you account for that when Argento, like most of his protagonists were women most of the time?
Yeah. Right. Absolutely. In fact, that's actually probably the funniest thing too, is that even though obviously there are elements of nudity, there are elements of, there are sexual elements in many of his films, he is probably the least interested in being, sexy for sex's sake. In a way, a workman like a Martino or a Fulci is like, fuck it, it's what they're paying for. We'll put it in the damn picture.
Yeah.
And you get films like Torso, which literally opens like a Swedish film, basically.
Yeah, I think Argento is. Yeah, he's less interested in just like uh, exploitative nudity and stuff, right? I mean,
Yeah,
it's there
exactly.
sometimes, but
And Bava really only takes advantage of that, having come from the old school, for lack of better words. Really only takes advantage of that when he feels it necessary, or when it's like integral to the motif, to the idea of the film, like Hatchet for a Honeymoon, which is you're following this very, very twisted killer throughout the entire picture. Um,
right.
but yeah, Argento uses it, but it's more or less like a tool in the tool belt, as opposed to here's the whole package, for lack of better words.
And
Well,
then can I just clarify one thing that I guess George and I have talked about this before, is that you mentioned it earlier, is that the term giallo gets thrown around a lot for all these movies, and not necessarily everything that these people made is considered a giallo. Like Suspiria,
Yeah,
for instance, is not by
it's
any
not a
means.
giallo.
Yes, right. Okay. Is it because of the supernatural aspect to it that is like a hard no with giallo, or is there something else that you or other people, critics, have said is like part of the criteria for that?
Giallo, by and large, is not supernatural. The only thing that ever gets debated, though, is phenomena, because the ideas behind it aren't necessarily obviously the idea of girl psychic link with bugs and things. Obviously, that's a fantasy element, but it still has the grounded image of the killer clad in black, slouch hat, all of that imagery. And the structure of it is more akin to it, and it doesn't hinge on the supernatural elements per se. The murderer is not a supernatural entity. I guess if there was a line to be drawn, that's kind of it.
well, and
And
like
there
you
are
were saying, well, just not to interrupt, but like you were saying before about how
yeah,
giallo has its roots in American pulp and mystery stories. The
and
monkey with the
also the
razor
English
blade.
murder mystery. Yeah,
Yeah, the monkey with the razor blade is an Edgar Allan Poe reference, right? Like the very first American mystery author. So it's kind of it's
exactly.
called
Yeah.
right.
And one other thing I've heard Quentin Tarantino talk about movies like American, quote, American giallo, like almost considered Cruising, William Friedkin's Cruising, to be an American giallo. But he was like, no, it's not. I would not consider that a giallo, because the main character is a police officer who is doing the investigation. And typically these movies need to be civilians who take over the role of a police investigator. Now, I don't know how much I see his point, but then when you look at a movie like The New York Ripper, which is a giallo made by Fulci, that's
Lucio
a
Fulci.
police
Yeah,
officer who's doing the investigation. So,
one hundred
I know
percent.
there's not definitive
I think
criteria there, but
right. I think that's an interesting line to draw, and I think obviously there are certain exceptions that can be made, but I think also the idea of the American giallo in and of itself is that there are very few that really occupy that sort of thing, because it also isn't just a what archetypes can we check the list on. There's a certain attitude to structure where it's almost there's almost this kind of anything can happen mentality in a lot of these films, which hinges on that idea of sort of a dreamlike state you're kind of being put in, where it's not. None of these films take place in a conventional reality, or they take on a very dreamlike element. It's like I said, it's the reason why Bay of Blood, that ending really is the only ending that can't exist, because there was no reality where, oh, they just get to ride off scot-free, oh, everything just gets, lost and forgotten. No, it's literally there's literally too much blood that's been spilled. And
Well,
Bava understands it's such a partial turn of events that the only way you can really end it is to have a complete, punchline version of an ending. And similarly, the thing that again that really made the ending to Duckling stand out is that juxtaposition of course, the infamous demise of the killer, but then juxtaposed against essentially a vision of all of the kids he was in charge of and he believed he was helping in heaven, and then him joining them as a very surreal poetic flourish. And it's one of the few flourishes he really goes for in that film. So I definitely see what it is, but there's I wouldn't I'm not sure if I'd even say Cruising kind of fills that role necessarily because of how much Friedkin was into grit and kind of the realist angle.
I can't
William,
remember.
I shot 45 minutes of gay porn Friedkin.
I went to the gay club. They let me shoot. It was crazy, right? That's my William Friedkin impression.
Yes,
but
and he's very fond of things.
Well, I mean, question:
they
Are
were
you
fisting
native?
other men? What?
Question: Are you native to Chicago, George?
No, but I'm Midwestern.
Gotcha. So at least you could put on the Chicago.
Yeah, I'm trying to do my Friedkin thing. Yeah, he is a Chicagoan. That's right. He's got to start the TV station. But I was going to ask about Cruising. I can't remember. Are there POV moments of the killer in Cruising?
Yes. I think in the park.
And he's wearing black leather, right? And we also get a very
aspect to it is huge, especially at the ending.
Well, we also get the kind of ending we were talking about with Plumage and with Alice Sweet Alice, to where we don't know whether or not Al Pacino has been turned to a killer at the end of the movie, right?
Yeah.
Or if he was always there. Yeah, exactly.
Right, where there's that moment of, has he been warped into a killer by his experience?
Yeah.
Which was probably the most controversial element of the movie. That Detective Wolfman, that guy we had on before, summed it up very well, Cruising. He goes, it was too gay for the regular population and too anti-gay for the gay population for anyone to like Cruising. It's that's very true, right?
Pretty much. Pretty much.
But with Bay of Blood, if we could transition to this sort of softly,
absolutely.
I felt like, first of all, Bay of Blood is different for a lot of reasons. I really liked it. And it was different because it felt to me like the first giallo film we'd watched where it had some sort of political, with a small p, statement to make at the end, where the kids kill the parents. I think the more realistic version would have been to have the husband and wife turn on each other for some reason, but they have the kids kill the parents to say, like, oh, the legacy of greed is being passed down because of capitalism or whatever. And I'm sure there's some sort of remnants of Mussolini that runs through some of this stuff a little bit, kind of like with Salo or whatever, right? I'm sure there's something there, especially with the Catholic Church too. Right? Come on, I don't know enough about Italian fascism.
I think also the ending. My read of that ending, I look at it in a certain way, because I've been talking about how Bava obviously knows that this is a very farcical film. There are so many bizarre characters, so many emotions taken to their absolute zeniths, motivations that the only way to get what you want is to keep digging the hole you're in. I mean, that's kind of the famous bit with the conniving couple, is that after it's like, oh yeah, we killed that guy. Okay, we got to go kill that girl. We got to go kill that, like going off of it like it's a goddamn grocery list. So he knows it's complete farce. So obviously there's the punchline ending of, oh yeah, the kids fucking killed them, because there's no way in hell they're getting away with this.
Yeah, but Jake, I didn't find the film to be that satirical in terms of like its its treatment of its characters. I was involved. I liked it.
Well, the thing is, I don't see it as satire necessarily, though. That's the thing. It's more of a you look at, there's such a, the way it devolves is kind of my thing, is that it starts out, very base level things. Obviously, you have a few eccentrics who live in the area that are concerned about what's going to happen to the bay. You have, conniving businessmen who want to get the rice, concrete and all that jazz.
The Scooby-Doo plot, kind of.
Exactly. Old Man Withers, it was you the whole time.
I was trying to keep people out of the bay, right?
Exactly. And then, of course, but the thing is, the great part of it that kind of sets up the fact that this is going to be unlike anything what Bava's done. Like, obviously, you can say that there's sort of the thread of Blood and Black Lace's whodunit structure, but the fact he goes for a double whammy of, we open with the death of the old lady who owns the bay, and then the husband who killed her gets killed.
Yeah, right.
That sets the tone of anything is possible in this film. There are no limits, no holds barred. But it's the devolution. It's the bodies piling on top of bodies to such a exorbitant degree, there is no way you can resolve this within reality. I look at it the same way I look at the ending of I Spit on Your Grave. There is no way in hell that woman's coming out of that forest a sane person.
Right.
There is no happy ending after that. I don't care if he made sequels. I don't care if there's, I Spit on Your Grave, The Next Generation. There is no way in hell that woman is coming out of that forest. She is either going to go insane
in space.
Yeah, exactly. It's like she's run off into the woods. She's completely insane. She becomes the villain of someone else's slasher film, basically. I watched a villain origin story. Here, it's just that because it's one of the earliest body count films and kind of contributes to the slasher, that idea. And of course, almost all the hallmarks, sexed up teenagers that get it, curse you for having a libido, that
which, by the way, was just like beyond gratuitous. And the other thing too about this one is that I didn't find it to have like half the sex appeal of something like Torso. I mean, all these kids they picked up.
Oh, not nearly. And again, that's Bava coming from the old school. Sex and nudity is not I must be lecherous and leer over it. Yeah, it's like
but he's got Claudine Auger from Thunderball, who is just absolutely beautiful. Yeah, and I was involved in her and her husband. Because here's the thing, Jake, I disagree with you on this thing being so out of control from the beginning. I was intrigued. And you know what? In a movie like this, I want to pick two bad people and be on their side in the game of bad versus bad. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Am I wrong? So I thought like it would have been a better.
I see what you mean there. It almost becomes a bit of like a crime caper element there, where it's like you have you have these criminals over here that at least have this goal. And to be fair, there's the one shred of it before you scratch beneath the veneer and you get to the cynical reasons. At least she had the veneer of, I must clear my father's name from murdering my mother and all that jazz. There's that. But my point is, again, it's not that it starts out. He sets the tone by saying anything can happen, but it does start relatively normal. I can see that. My point, though, is that as it goes on and as the bodies keep piling up, I heard there were I think someone sat down and counted. I didn't count it myself, but there's 13 deaths or something like that in the film.
I like for random teenagers to just be to be cannon fodder in the middle of the movie for no reason whatsoever. It's just to pad out the runtime too.
Well, and not just. I believe actually that was brought in by producers. I think.
I'm not surprised.
Wouldn't shock.
Yeah, I'm not surprised either. But that
yes.
Basically, but it's like again, that also kind of contributes to how I look at it, though, is that because now you have 4 dead fucks on top of, someone's in the bay, the old lady's been hanged. Now you have these 2 crazy characters that are about to spoil the couple's schemes, so they got to get whacked. Carlo Rambaldi's just spilling blood all over the goddamn place. You have that immaculate twist where the secretary of the businessman storms in on the illegitimate son of the old couple, and he's like, you fucking conniving bitch. And, has that whole scene happen.
Yeah, I loved it. I love the double crosses of, you sleep with him, and that this will happen. I also like this character that also appears in Torture a Duckling, which is this sort of like John Steinbeck Faulkner kind of mentally slow, like villager character that becomes kind of like the scapegoat, right.
Yeah, exactly. But my point is that it's not that it starts, he sets the mood by saying anything can happen in this film, but everything else about the setup, like I said, is pretty conventional. And again, it's a lot of basic motivate, a lot of understandable motivations, a lot of ideas of greed, who wants this, who wants that, obviously the entomologist with the insects, he doesn't want, he has his ecological reasons for not wanting, the bay to get spoiled, but also his own private obsession with bugs and being a bit of a minor sadist. His wife being, this, occultist, reads tarot cards and proclaims everyone's fate and stuff like that. And so she's not dealing death, but proclaiming that death is coming. So kind of, so it's like with Don't Torture a Duckling, where it is, you didn't directly kill them, but you said their fate is sealed. And or in Duckling's case, you deliberately willed this series of events into being. Or in her cases, or in the case of the lady in Bay of Blood, it's simply death, all these terrible things are happening. And of course, the husband's not listening to any of it too. So you got that lovely, loveless marriage happening in the back. But that's my point, is that the more you look at, the more elements that get brought into play, and the more they start stacking on top of each other. It isn't it's complete farce from top to bottom. It's a devolution of, okay, now I have to go kill this person to get this done. Now I have to go take care of that body. And the fact of the matter is, it's like, already, like, we're pushing 10 dead people on this fucking premises. There's no way they're getting out of this scot-free. So
yeah,
so
I see what
my
you're
thing
saying.
with, so my thing with the ending is that I look at it, obviously there's the punchline idea of it. And even though the Hays Code was dead and buried by now, there is kind of that idea that villains must go punished. And we're out of all the other villains, so here two left. Gotta do it somehow. But I also, part of me thinks, and this might be a stretch, part of me thinks it's almost a bit of like a death row vision, sort of. Because the thing is, you never see the face of who gets up in the villa after the fight in the dark. So I almost want to say, maybe it's not gunshot, the kids did it. Maybe it's, Claudine Egger just got fucking her shit rocked in that villa in the final fight. And that's basically, she had her brief vision of, everything worked out. We took care of all the things. Now the bay is all mine. Right. And her getting shot. Because obviously we don't have the shot back in the villa of her dead on the floor to confirm it. But that's kind of one of my other interpretations, is that basically she did not live. She did not survive that final confrontation in the villa.
Let me ask you this.
Yeah.
I'll take the dream. Fine.
Yeah.
But like, okay, I'll dig you on that one. But I was just going to ask, like, with an actress like Claudine Auger, who's like gorgeous, right? And Ryan, you're a big Bond guy. Why couldn't these? I mean, the way you were describing the reaction of these contemporarily with the public was sort of like as a joke, or just like trash when it came out. What would this have been like a big career come down to be a star of one of these films if you were a former Bond girl? And why couldn't these Bond girls get any jobs in Hollywood? Thoughts? No. Yeah. Go ahead.
I think with a lot of actresses from this period, I think some of it's also just, it's a job. At the end of the day, I think there's a lot of just workmanism that comes out of it. I think it's just, okay, I did Thunderball, terrific picture, made lots of moolah, but kind of there are very few recurring Bond girls. That's kind of the nature of the thing, is that she's kind of like, you have this one big starring appearance, and then you kind of move on to other things. Like Ursula Andress, obviously after Dr. No, she became very prolific in this, arena of genre entertainment, doing everything from Red Sun to 10th Victim, all these different, genre films. So I don't think it's considered much of a come down, only because her career is comparatively young to say a star from Hollywood's golden age moving to England or moving to Italy to make these B pictures. It's the difference from
Joan Crawford doing Trog, for instance.
I guess it's
the difference. Yeah, it's no. Go ahead. Make your point.
I'm sorry. I'm just guessing. Maybe the mentality was like, well, I'm a model from Europe. I got to be in Bond. That's a career high. I'm just going to keep doing it. Because now it's like you think of someone like, I don't know, Olga Kurylenko from like Quantum of Solace. Okay, she's in that. She gets a shot at doing other shit. We'll throw her in Max Payne or other things, right? But I guess you guys want to move on to Torso. What were your thoughts on?
I have a few comments about this movie. I think most interesting to me was how much this movie is an influence directly on the Friday the 13th series. I mean, in a number of ways, not just in terms of location of the isolated campsite with a bay, lake, whatever you want to call it, the dock. There's naked girls walking along the dock. It's very reminiscent of what we would expect from a Friday the 13th movie. And in fact, I mean, the thing that shocked me the most was the direct replicated kill scene where the couple is having sex and they get impaled with a spear through it. I mean, isn't that not used in Friday the 13th? I believe part 2. You know,
That's used
Kevin
in part
Bacon goes
2.
out that way.
yeah.
And also the kill with, I believe it's a bill hook of the slightly nervous gentleman who gets it right in the face, swung through the door. That, I believe, was actually the basis of the kill the kid in the wheelchair in part 2 as well. Sends him rolling down the hill.
And no one is safe, not even people in wheelchairs, as in both movies. The old lady is not safe at all. And I thought that was pretty shocking to start the movie like that, where she gets hanged from her wheelchair, while in her wheelchair. And that scene is I mean, it's a very haunting scene. There's no dialogue for the first, 5-6 minutes of the movie. And it's wonderful as the wheels, the spokes of her wheelchair stop spinning.
That was
she,
one of my favorite bits.
Kicks the bucket.
That is one of my favorite bits with that. And the great thing about that scene too is that it kind of echoes Bava's earlier Gothic work, because while the manor itself isn't innately this, ancient castle-like place, it's still ornate enough and still carries that haunted quality of a lot of his earlier, like The Body and the Whip and Black Sunday. It carries some of that ambience with it. And of course, you have that very classical piece of music by Stelvio Cipriani, which is in complete contrast to the, the summery Baroque pop stuff that comes on later, or the very eerie opening with the kind of, Latin percussion and everything. And he just, it's a very melancholy opening. It's a very melancholy opening. And he also is very unflinching about it. You really sit and squirm with these murder scenes too. That's the other thing.
I do agree with George though about that the entire middle of the film is kind of like, it is gratuitous. It is kind of it does grind the movie to a halt. I think it would have been a much better way to somehow develop other characters that were involved in the mystery of the plot.
In all honesty, as influential as those kills have become, because in all fairness, those two scenes basically gave two very famous kills to one of the most famous slasher franchises. And although I do like the poetic flourish of having this cartoonishly happy dune buggy, and then you just get that slow zoom in on it after they're all dead with the sad piano music of the theme from the opening of the film, I'm like, Bava, be still my beating heart. I think if they actually did take time to at least flesh people out more, I think it would have lost that idea of the farcical tone. But at the same time, I think he also weaves it in enough to the point where when she finds the 4 dead bodies in the businessman's house, that at least he uses it as fuel to propel us later on in the film. So I can understand why it still works and why it's still a part of the picture. But yeah, if they had actually taken that out and had focused on developing the characters that are already in play, that are relevant to that plot, I think it would have cut down on that. And I think it actually would have made the ending feel even stranger, though, if that
I think it would have been a classic if we had a little more time with all of our haughty lead characters.
There are a lot of people in this movie, and keeping track of all of them too is a little challenging.
Hey, would you guys mind if I tapped out for like 3 or 4 minutes here?
Do you want to take like a break or something, or no?
We haven't. Is that okay if we take a little break? We haven't done that in a long time. Remember we used to do that where we'd be like, we'll be right back. I don't have any like fucking screen to put up or anything. Is that okay, guys, if we take a 5-minute break?
Yeah, no, I'm fine with that.
Okay, cool. We'll be right back.
We'll be right back after these messages.
Exactly. Okay, I'm back, everybody. Sorry about that.
All good?
Big R.
So you haven't seen Joker 2 yet, right?
Can you hear me?
I can. Have you haven't gone to see Joker yet? Can you hear me?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you. I don't think you can hear me. George is having some technical difficulties at the moment.
Can't hear you.
Yeah, I know.
There we go.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I'm back. I'm back.
Okay.
Sorry. Thank you very much.
Very good. Yeah, that'll be a good outtake.
Yeah. Well, is that a bad break? You still have 7 viewers that are hanging with us, man.
Yeah.
It's pretty nice. Sorry, guys. I've told the guys before I have a little bit of a head cold, so I need to do a little maintenance. Oh my God.
I know. I have eyes.
Glasses.
Whoa,
Unlike
yeah.
unlike the doll in torso. Yes, I'm. Trust me, it would have been a comedy of errors myself if I'd walked out there with the shades on in the dark fucking hallway, just knocking into fucking everything. Aye.
No, that's cool. And actually, we were talking before about character motivation, the psychosexual sort of things that are plaguing the killers. And I found that whatever was going on with the killer in Torso, is that our next film? Or is Duckling
no, don't torture a Duckling, because Duckling's 72 and Torso's 73.
Well, good, because I'm happy to end with Torso. I really liked it. But yeah, let's talk about Torture a Duckling. So Jake, you said yesterday on Twitter, you go, this is the best movie that's ever been made. I'm going hard. What, right? First of all, I want to ask Ryan. I want you set the ground rules here, but I want to get Ryan's straight up real reaction. What did you think of Don't Torture a Duckling?
Go for it.
I liked it. Didn't love it as much as Bird with the Crystal Plumage for sure. I put this probably second of the 4.
I agree.
In terms of quality, in terms of, because like I was describing with the other film, this has a very, very good plot that we are able to follow very strongly. You're invested in this plot, right? Torso has no plot whatsoever. I mean, it is mayhem.
None.
Bay of Blood is like, it's there, but we're going to park it between, a mad romp of sex in between. This one has a very, a more shocking aspect to it in terms of the victims are children, which I was not expecting by any means to see in a movie like this. In terms of graphic violence, it was kind of shocking to me. Maybe I'm wrong here. Is that how kind of tame it was in terms of? I've only seen a few other Lucio Fulci films, but my God, those are like outrageously gory and gruesome and disgusting. And this is like very tame and not sophisticated, but like tasteful, I guess you would say. And I think you have to do that given the subject matter of your having children be the victims of murder. So you can't show that in a graphic way, the same way you would in Torso, for instance. So there's that. It has a lot of interesting societal themes to it that I don't think are explored in a lot of other of Fulci's movies from my limited experience. Like, I look at the New York Ripper, which is like my baseline for when I tried to get into this genre years ago. And I was like, what the hell is this stuff?
Famous last words. My first giallo, the New York Ripper.
My first giallo was the New York Ripper.
I haven't seen this. Do I need to see this?
And
let me just quick pitch to George. Should you or should you not see New York Ripper? Honestly, yes.
Just
remember, it's a fucking wild experience. It's very violent. It's very uncompromising, and
it's
I look
ridiculous.
at it as
The ending,
it's
the
not,
explanation is like the stupidest thing I've ever seen. But anyway,
it's utterly insane, but at the same time, it's also this weird crossbreed between the New York City grit and grime of like the 70s urban crime thriller craze, but then mapped on with all the giallo trimmings and trappings, gloved killer, bizarre modus operandi, gruesome deaths that, you know, anyone could be at sort of structure, but with a heaping helping of perverse.
quacking a phone, quacking killer on the phone, talking as Donald
Yeah,
Duck.
that very,
We had a little
very
Donald Duck
sexually
in this movie
charged-
too, though.
And that's the segue that, you know, back to this one is there's a Donald Duck weird connection to this movie too. And I read, is it true one of the titles, alternate titles, is don't murder Donald Duck or something like that?
It might
Duck.
be. I wouldn't be surprised. I wouldn't be surprised one bit.
Don't torture Donald Duck. Yes, it's listed as the translation apparently of one title.
Gosh, that's wild.
That's
That is
on
wild.
a sign at Disneyland, right? Ryan, you know that.
Right.
Okay. Yeah.
But yeah,
interesting.
since I interrupted you, then keep going with your thoughts.
I was going to say the only other thing was the implications of the movie in terms of differing from the other films in our list is that this was the rural giallo compared to all the other urban ones, which was a very jarring change compared to everything else that we've seen. So there's that. We're dealing with a much more simple kind of characters here. And of course, the I forget her name, but the character who is the oddball city slicker who comes to the village, the beautiful young lady who's there.
I know the girl you're talking about, played by Barbara Boucher, I believe.
Yes. I hear Patrizia. She's it's how do rural people view city people? It's vice versa. There's that. There's the implications about what it says about organized religion in the church. And the movie goes explicitly to say that these children were not, molested or sexually molested or anything like that. They were only murdered. But, you can't help but wonder there's also some kind of implication that it's having about, the future revelations of the Catholic Church sex scandal.
Yeah, that wouldn't have been a thing till the 90s, right? I mean, that wouldn't have been a thing.
Well, yeah, because I don't think
how much of that was implicitly known among people that was never then widely, exposed.
Oh, I get what you mean there.
I get you. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it didn't break out in the Washington Post until
so that might explain part of the big backlash in the immediate local backlash to the film that led to its limited release. I can see that now, but I do think it's also
how much did we know about Weinstein before it was revealed in the late 2010s? Going back, or did he? Yeah.
Right.
But
did he do it?
So there's that, which is an interesting. There's the superstition, superstitious aspect to it about people taking scapegoats out on people who are different and very other. In terms of this movie being, perhaps there's an element of mental illness. Perhaps it's just a weird devotion to superstitious practices and all that. So there's a lot of interesting ideas that are put forth in this movie that you're not seeing in a lot of the more typical slasher aspects of slasher movies in the genre.
Yeah, I felt like it was a more sophisticated film than
it is
the others, and the photography was beautiful in it. I thought it felt like a more elevated film of the genre, right? Go ahead, Jake. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
It's all good. Yeah, I'll put it there, just for the record. It topped the charts as my new favorite Lucio Fulci film. Because my old favorite, and this is going to be a bit jarring, but I'll explain why. My old favorite, and it's still like number 2, is 1981's House by the Cemetery, but with a very specific caveat.
That's a tough one.
Must be. No, here's the thing, though. It has to be watched in Italian, because the issue is the English dub is so cram-packed with ADR. It's not just the voice of Bob. There is just dozens of lines that are not there in the Italian dub. Everywhere there's atmosphere in the Italian version of House by the Cemetery, there's like a bazillion fucking useless lines used to fill the soundtrack in the English dub. Like, we don't even have to talk about Bob, just the opening. a simple line of, kind of like a hello is the thing that the girl opens with at the very opening when she's in the basement. And then it's just silence and the atmosphere of it. Instead of in the English dub, hello, are you there? Where are you? None of that. None of that in the Italian dub. There's so much more room to breathe, so much more atmosphere. The dreamlike surrealist approach he takes holds a million times better. Unfortunately, Don't Torture Duckling doesn't have that problem, because even though there was an English language track made, it didn't really see the light of day. So it's kind of, for all intents and purposes, Italian is the intended version you're listening to for, all recordings. But what made it top that for me is the fact that once there are beats of this film that hit you, some of the reveals of how these children died do freak you out. I mean, it's not even like that's a dummy, or it's that if you're buying into the film, you're buying into the logic, everything is a tool to tell you this story. These aren't dummies. These aren't makeup effects props. This is real violence happening to effectively real people. Its grounded nature gives almost every aspect of it legitimacy. And so when you see the boy who drowned, or he's strangled and then drowned, and you see the way Florinda Balkan leaves this film is A-class filmmaking. The use of diegetic music from the car radios, the editing, the gruesome makeup effects, the switchblade, it's brutal. It is an agonizing scene to watch. And the coda and in all fairness, she is not a victimless woman. She still, in her mind, willed the deaths of 3 children for the crime of accidentally trespassing on her stillborn son's grave. Right. It's like she is still clearly not of sound mind. And the poetry of car after car after car of the freeway filled with families passing her by. And one of the last things she sees, if we're just going off of, camera as POV, is that little, I think it's either a boy or a girl, but this child gliding past in slow motion. And that's the last thing she sees before she dies. There is so much incredibly well done stuff mechanically. And the thing is, there are a lot of subtle things too, because I went into this knowing the twist, because I had seen it years ago. But that there's brilliant moments all throughout where in the scene with the funeral, and the mother starts crying desperately, the murderer is here. The murderer is here. Who's the first person the camera pans to? The priest.
Right.
That is the first person in the frame. It's like Bernard Herrmann's Rosebud motif. If you know what the music means, it means the sled. And like the first time you hear the music at all, it's wonderful. It's beautifully constructed and so clearly done with intent. And so you're buying into the reality of this, and it's a terrible thing everyone's going through in this. And I like the ensemble quality of it too, because you're not looking for heroes and villains. You're just kind of watching this unfold, and you're keeping track of the bait and switches Fulci plants and pays off, where kid picks up phone, hangs up, and girl who hangs up at the other end, shot of Barbara Boucher. So you don't know, is she preying on these kids? Or you have, obviously they try to deflect from the priest, but there is still that, ambience of, obviously, if he's being made a major character and no one's off limits, for God's sakes, one of the cops could be revealed to have been, the killer all along.
Well, she is definitely made to be the most red herring of anyone in the movie.
Exactly.
How provocative her presence is in terms of, especially
and how clearly
herself as a naked to a small child is,
which, by the way, was my favorite scene in the movie.
Yeah.
That was my favorite scene. I thought it was terrific. Yeah.
It is so frank, and it is so, and the thing is, obviously, there is a bit of the, not really libertine per se, but because of the laxer censorship standards in Italy, there were still censorship issues there, but it's nothing compared to if you tried to make Don't Torture a Duckling on United States soil, you know, the feds would be running in on you from like day one.
I don't think that would be, but what would the studio
no,
would just
no,
be
like,
no.
They would never allow
no, exactly.
that.
No, exactly. But the beauty of that is that sort of frankness, but the way it's played out and the way, you know what you're saying?
Well, I was just going to say, I think it's more of a cultural thing. I think, like, obviously, that scene is played. That's strange that she's doing this to a young boy. It's sort of setting her up as a red herring. But think about Leone's Once Upon a Time in America. There's a whole sequence where, like, young boys want to see a naked woman, and like that wouldn't happen in from an American voice.
No,
that would be too
exactly
odd, even though it does resonate as like truthful. You know what I mean?
No, exactly, because the whole thrust of it, you know, is that you have these characters that obviously I believe they're 12 is around the age they're on, so they're basically just about, if not hitting puberty at that time. So they are starting to, you know, think about these things and think about, you know,
well, and I have to wonder too with the theme of the film where the priest is worried that these kids will be corrupted.
Exactly.
I mean, what does that have to, you know, does that play into a theme at all, that there's corruption all around these children and they're being tempted all the time by things, you know what I'm saying?
There is a bit of that element too, and that's kind of the reason why it's such a fascinating take for the killer to have, because obviously it could so easily have been turned into this schlocky, oh, he's preying on these little boys and this, that, and the other, but it's this idea that he does not want them to be corrupted by the world, but he sees corruption all around, and so the only way out is, you know, ship them up to heaven. Get them up there quick. You know, it's
right.
And again, it's the modern world, though, is also what he's seeing as the most corrupting moral influence on them, and it's personified by her as this person, an outsider from the city who comes in and it's corrupting these young children by giving them.
And I'm just that it's something. It can also be something as simple as Thomas Milan's character offering him that cigarette, and at first he takes it and he's like. And at first he takes, because clearly, obviously, he's like, I should not be indulging in any vices, not this or that and the other. And then, of course, later on in the film, before he gears up for the final act, he refuses the cigarette outright. So there's kind of that an interesting bit of temptation. And I think that's also a bit of a sleight of hand to prove that not even, while the character is not being, you know, pitched as the red herringest red herring, he is still shown to be human, flawed, corruptible.
Well, so you know, that's weird though, because like with Catholics, if you believe in original sin, which is one of the tenets of the religion, his plot is no good. Right. And then also, I know that Catholic priests smoke and drink.
But I believe, if I'm correct, is that by being baptized, you're forgiven from original sin, right? Or at least partially.
You might have me on that one, yeah.
So
I think so, yeah. And the idea, and you know, obviously the idea of Catholic guilt is something Fulci's very familiar with, because he jokes about that in interviews and stuff like that. And it's also just one of those, you know, conditions of the religion in many ways. You know, it's always, you know, always weighing on your mind the idea, you know, the idea of the sinful world, or that you are born with sin. That you're basically, you know, stuck for the rest of your life repenting for that. But you also have to remember too, is that he is technically, if you never hear his age, but I'll go on a gamble and say, if they cast a man in his early 20s to be play the role of a priest, I assume the character is in his early 20s as well. Like he must have been ordained, like he went to school, did everything, got ordained, you know, really young. There is a sort of zealotry of youth, I guess I'd say, where you see it a lot in like modern, you know, online discourse surrounding religion, is that a lot of younger people, when they're adopting religion, almost seem more puritanical than any of the old guard in many ways, because they're now fresh and they understand the tenets, and they're like, we must adhere to this, you know, lock, stock, and barrel. And I wouldn't be surprised if, you know, obviously once the mental illness kind of became readily apparent, if that was kind of the warping, that was what became warped, is that he has all these teachings ingrained in him, but he's clearly mentally unwell. And all of a sudden, those two things just kind of fuse together in his mind, saying, my God, they're going to be despoiled by the world, despoiled by all these horrible things.
Like perhaps
what can I do to this? Yeah, exactly.
Was he perhaps an off-screen victim of something? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so he's thinking, you know, what can I do to stop this? And unfortunately, his answer is to kill them, because he believes that they'll have died without committing any of these, you know, egregious sins, or, you know, he will die with this misguided idea of preserving innocence.
Does he see himself as this messianic figure then, that he is saving them, that he's saving their
part of that
at the price of his own? There's part of that,
because literally the first scene you see, he's almost pitched in a way almost like a Jesus-like figure, because he's walking to the first scene of the crime with the children in arm. I can't remember.
He prays over the body. Yeah.
He prays over the body in multiple instances. And
we cut to the smiling face of the witch.
Yes.
Which gives you some kind of, right? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. And of course, that then plays into her motivation of her hex is coming to fruition.
Right.
And it's one of those things where, you know, obviously people might try and take, you know, oh, it's these, you know, oh, we're showing that the Christian people are the true, they truly just feel people. Where it's like, no, religion and spirituality exists in this strange space where it's almost the excuse for people wishing and willing these horrible things to happen. It's almost kind of a total
perversion. I mean, in that you break a commandment, thou shalt not kill, in order to save other people from
exactly.
It's like he's totally warped in a fundamentalist point of view. Totally finding the wrong message.
Well, here's where I wish I had more knowledge of Italian culture, because you guys ever see that documentary that was on Shudder, Woodlands Dark and Days Bewitched, which was about British folk horror movies? In England, as far as I can understand, you guys should check it out. It's really good. It's like 6 hours long. It's terrific. And it's about this like conflict in the British psyche that also was sort of inherent in Tolkien too, of this idea of the pagan ways conflicting in an ancient way with the Roman imposition of Christianity, and how paganism and that kind of like stay off the moors, witch mentality still informs British horror to this day. I would be very interested to learn sort of the mythology of witchcraft or paganism in Italy as it exists.
Yeah.
Right. Because I don't know much about it. I assume it's there though.
And obviously the implication, even, it's probably a regional variant, but, you can recognize what she's trying to do with the mud dolls. It's obviously a takeoff on voodoo witch doctor practice, with the pins and the certain rituals that you have to do to commune and direct these demons to carry out what you wish to be carried out. And
wouldn't you imagine though that any sort of Italian witch folklore would come from ancient Rome, would come from that pantheon of gods?
Exactly. So I'm almost interested to see how many of these practices parallel variants from around the world. Like, obviously I'm looking at it from the American perspective of, we have, a lot of voodoo history down in the Southeast. So, how does that compare to what's happening with, this idea of witchcraft within this very regionally Italian picture? That is something I'd like to learn more about myself. And I think that might actually help us understand a bit more of Balkan's character, because they don't really get into the weeds of the, they don't really get too deep into the weeds of the actual practices themselves. Obviously she explains, this is what I did after she, has her convulsion on the floor and finally comes to. Yeah. But she's still, very closed about it. It's almost like, it's almost like we can't talk about it's all, I hate to say the Fight Club rules, don't talk Yeah, it's
but
like
I
we
wonder
can't
if like
talk
this,
about the witch.
because like when we have witches again in Suspiria, it's in Germany, right? In a place where it's
Yes.
more like there was pagan religions that was separate from,
And it's
you know,
and it's also a more classical conception of it, witches' covens and these gatherings and these sorts of
yeah,
things.
yeah, right, which is more European because it was based on the paganism of like the Germanic and sort of, those tribes that pre-existed,
Yeah.
just sort of prehistoric, if you will, like,
Right.
European tribes.
Right.
But I hate to try to wrap this up too soon, guys, but I do have to go soon. I don't want to cut our conversation too short. But
Okay.
just to
In that
let you
case, let's
know,
move on to Torso quick.
should we move on to Torso? Is that all right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Okay.
Yeah, to round it out.
Okay, I apologize. I like Torso a
No.
lot. I thought it was fun.
My weird thing is that I had this sliding scale moment with all 4 films. Bay of Blood kind of stayed where I have it at, where I'm like, I enjoy it, I like it. It's not my favorite Bava film. That's always Blood and Black Lace, but I thought it was neat. Bird with the Crystal Plumage came down just slightly, just because I felt there was a little drag in a few places.
It's a little bit
obviously,
yeah,
and obviously, Don't Torture a Duckling. I was not expecting it to work the way it did for me last night, but after it hit me emotionally like a sledgehammer, I'm like, okay, I guess this is now one of the films I really like. It's my favorite Fulci now, I guess. Didn't plan on it. It happened. Torso, I joked about it earlier in the show, but it really is, this played better when you were a horny teenager. This is a proper midnight movie. And I'm glad I picked it as the representation of Martino, because that kind of does characterize a lot of what he'd do later on. Because he would go on to do a lot of the weird Italian ripoff monster movies. Like, I believe he did The Great Alligator. I believe he did I can't remember what the name of the original film, but I know it was turned into Screamers by Roger Corman and New World Pictures, where they shot fresh material. But the point is, he'd go on to be continue to be this jack of all trades in the exploitation film industry. And Torso, coming off of a bunch of these more summery high society films like Case of the Scorpion's Tail, like All the Colors of the Dark, like like Your Vice is a Locked Room, and moving into what is ostensibly the perfect template of the proto slasher. This is about as near to a classic slash. The only other film that I can think of, and it came out the same year, was 1973's The Severed Arm, where it's, these people did this terrible thing, and then the curse comes back to haunt them as he, tries to kill them forever. They're hacking off his arm in the mining accident. Basically, Timothy by the buoys, but as a movie. That is the only other film this early that compares to anything like pre-Black Christmas. And the most frightening thing is how on the money Torso is in anticipating everything about 80s slashers. It's specifically college students. It's specifically sexed up to the nines. The killer has a very psychosexual motive. There is some terrible trauma that happened to him. There are very grisly kills, like, the guy who tries to extort him getting fucking his head slammed into the goddamn wall.
That was awesome. That was great.
That was a raw one.
I like how they cut back to his head after we saw the dummy head get completely smashed, and they cut back to him, and he's like, "Oh."
And the thing is, the only other time I've seen
is also quite shocking too.
Which one, right?
The girl in the mud when she
the swamp scene's a classic.
And after she leaves the hippie, love-in, and they're like, "Let's kill that bitch." I was like, Jesus Christ, and then like they they shove her head down in the mud. I was like, God damn. And I thought too, like at the end when he's just like, let me just since I have some free time, just start like sawing off arms. I was like, God, Jesus Christ.
Exactly. It's utterly brutal, utterly.
And even though you don't see 100% of it, you hear a lot of it off screen while he's sawing body parts off.
It's
probably the sickest, when you think about it, just in terms of like, let me open up this girl's shirt here and let me feel her breasts. It's like, what? You know what I mean? Like,
and the thing, and the other thing too,
and
the other thing too is that every cinematographer before now had a really solid emphasis on contrast. Vittorio Storaro, Sergio Diafonisi. I can't remember the guy's name who did Duckling. And of course, Mario Bava lensing his own film. They all have this idea of light and dark. Here, everything is flooded. It's lit like daytime television, but that kind of makes it even more disgusting because it's like we're not trying to hide anything. We're going to show you in as much detail as we feel necessary this guy chopping fucking limbs off, putting them in bags, blood all over the fucking floor. It is truly anticipatory of everything that would happen in the 80s. And the fact it happened a half decade before Halloween and everything the imitators would do afterwards.
I was thinking about the car scene when the two kids are making it in the car and we see the POV from behind. And I was like, oh, I've seen this before. 100%. I was like, wait a minute. No, you haven't. You know what I mean? Like in terms of like chronology of, when these films came out.
That is completely innovation. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. You know what I mean? I was like, oh, wow. It's
the cat and mouse aspect of him stalking the final girl in the house too is also quite good. Especially my favorite moments where she's trying to get the key out of the door and then she knocks it out, but it doesn't land on the paper. And he just gently puts the key onto the paper for her so that she can get out of the room and then he can continue the hunt. I mean, that's
this is one of the
brutal.
This is one of those films that made me think, everybody thought the guy who wrote Scream, what's his name? Kevin
Williamson.
Kevin Williams
was such a genius. He literally just like took the giallo recipe and just was like, what if we did a slasher film and there was like, red herrings and a mystery as to who the killer was? Yeah. Because in America, it always seems like the killer is, with the exception, I guess, maybe of Freddy Krueger, who has sort of a psychosexual origin of revenge or whatever. But most of the time, it's just kind of like this ambiguous supernatural evil force, right? Where there's no real mystery about it, right? Whereas in this film, however ham-fisted or successful it is, we have this kind of like uber horny guy who is the ultimate red herring dude who's, and I thought the scarf was a little much.
The ascot's so weird. Yeah,
he was wearing the inverted colors of the scarf. So his was black with red, and this guy's was red with black. It's like
that was a comical stretch, honestly. That was. And the thing,
somebody they call her up and say, stop looking for the man with the scarf, otherwise you're gonna get killed.
Exactly.
And it's like,
and the thing is, this is where you can tell that it's clearly being done for pure audience entertainment. That there is no greater artistic pursuit happening with Torso.
The food delivery guy is the audience surrogate who walks in on the girls sunbathing and is like, oh, right? I mean,
exactly. But the funniest thing about this to me too is one of the co-writers of it, Ernesto Gastaldi. I wanted to make sure there was a Gastaldi picture in here, but the funniest thing is I accidentally picked probably one of the tamest of his oeuvre because Ernesto Gastaldi is kind of renowned as this sort of Cirque du Soleil M. Night Shyamalan in the space of mystery writing. Because what happens, specifically in Martino films, is there's like 5 million twists in the final act. Things keep hitting left, right, and center out of nowhere. You're like disoriented for the final reel of his pictures. It happened in Your Vice is a Locked Room. It happens with the switches in, I believe he wrote on Scorpion's Tail. All of the Colors of the Dark benefits terrifically. So does The Strange Vice of Mrs. Ward. Ernesto Gastaldi kind of became a go-to of, if I want to do a murder mystery and I want to flummox the audience to hell and back, I get Gastaldi. And he also has done tamer versions of that. He had written one of my favorites, and one that I encourage everyone to go watch after this, which is Forbidden Photos of a Lady Above Suspicion, which is part of this. It's fantastic. And it's part of this small trio of Hitchcockian flavored films where he kind of plays off of the old Gothic trope of drive the woman insane until she dies, basically.
Like gaslighting.
Kills herself. Gaslight. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And he is really built for that kind of a structure. So it's kind of fascinating that I was thinking Torso in, this is a great prototypical slasher, but ironically enough, it also is one of the tamer structures of Eddie Gastaldi's script, because compared to the others, if this was a Gastaldi from 71 or 2, It probably would have been the professor, but then the professor would have gotten bumped off, and then you would have found out that Susie Kendall was secretly the craziest pervert of the whole bunch, and then somehow she gets it in the end. That is the kind of twist he likes pulling off. So it is a bit of a letdown, actually, because of the finale too, where it's just there's the poetry of, oh, he was traumatized by seeing a sibling or a friend falling off a cliff, and then all of a sudden he gets thrown off the cliff. But then you don't see any of it. He just gets thrown off in the dark.
The sibling was trying to rescue the doll
of
the girl, and that's what sets him off. And then he has
a lot of people falling off cliffs. I was, Ryan, while you were gone, I was telling Jake when I watched The Psychic, which is Bava's, not Bava's, sorry, Fulci's sort of attempt at making a film to appeal to American audiences, right? There was a character that falls off a cliff and hits their head like 15 times on the way down the rock, exactly like Don't Torture a Duckling. Like he just did it again, like he couldn't get enough. Did we lose Jake?
Good ending, you know.
No, I'm still here.
Yeah,
can't go wrong with that.
But no, there's a lot of falling off of cliffs. There's, yeah, go ahead.
Now, did you put together that the opening menage a trois was the explanation for the ending?
I forgot about that till the end when they brought it back.
Honestly, I'll be honest. There's a reason why I was joking about it being the 70s Swedish movie opening.
Yeah.
And I'm not talking Bergman, because literally it is
Summers with Monica. Yeah. You know what I'm talking about. That's got a little nudity in there.
I'm stealing that.
You don't have to.
No, but it's like it is so frank, and it is so chock full of, yes, we're sending this to the grindhouses the world over. You're only allowed to watch this on 42nd Street in the Big Apple. Nowhere else. You have to make a transcontinental pilgrimage to see this film.
Well, that's like one of those bits where like Tarantino writes about when he worked at the theater and the projectionist was like, hey, here's my envelope of every film strip I clipped with tits. Right. You know, where he just kept it in like in an envelope, and he's like, here's all the nude scenes. Right. You know,
it's like Cinema Paradiso, but less wholesome.
Exactly. Yeah. But no, that was, I almost, because it's a cheat. Because like the professor, there's no evidence that he was, you know what I mean?
He is the killer by virtue of being kept off screen the longest. It's one of those kinds of twists. And that's why I was surprised when revisiting this, where I'm like, yeah, no, this isn't Ernesto Gastaldi writing his triple axel somersault backflip of an ending. It's more conventional, but not as rewarding.
Well,
you know what, though, you talk about how this is
it doesn't present itself as a whodunit, though, in my opinion. Like, I always think
that's true. That's
Friday the 13th is like the worst whodunit in the history of like writing, in terms of like they're making it into this thing about who's the killer. Oh, is it this person? Is it this person?
But it's more about
it's some random lady that shows up at the end that we've never met before, and it's like, oh, cool, exactly. That's a great twist ending.
Yeah,
I will say there's good atmosphere in this film. There's a pretense to a whodunit, because we get little shots like, oh, Susie Kendall notices one of the girls and an older guy talking in a car. What are they doing? Is this part of a conspiracy? You know, right?
Neat.
But like, I think about, Jake mentioned this is the most like a slasher film. It's still classier because these are kids at an art school in Rome or somewhere in Italy, right? We get nice little shots like
Perugia. Yes, they're discussing Perugia at the opening. Yeah.
Get a nice little dolly shot. Remember when Susie Kendall was walking with the professor and she walks under the bridge, and then we get a little dolly shot where it moves, and it's like they use like the atmosphere. If you film a slasher film in Italy, it looks like a Chanel commercial, like, just 100%. By virtue of you being there, right?
And the greatest thing is that a lot of it's in where you're shooting. Like I didn't mention this with Bay of Blood, but Bava was renowned for a lot of his micro budget movie tricks. He was just known for creating all these very clever special effects with like cartoonishly limited resources. And I believe his trick on Bay of Blood was that all of the tracking shots, because of the confines where they were shooting, he had to do the tracking shots by mounting the camera in a radio flyer wagon. So they're just dragging this child's wagon around to do the tracking. And when you see that shot of I believe it's the German girl who runs onto the pier, That's smooth. That's perfectly smooth. They're really insanely smooth shots like that.
What kind of camera was he using to where that would fit in a radio flyer wagon, like a 16? What the hell was he shooting at?
I have no idea. Maybe he built it on like a plank, or maybe he like had like maybe it was slightly bigger. Maybe they built it on like a plank or something like that. But it's really, really clever stuff they're doing over there, and with that kind of camera work. Because I believe the guy who did Torso, Giancarlo Ferrando, is not really one of the well-known guys. He isn't Estorato. He isn't even like Sergio Salvati, who did a lot of Fulci's films in the 70s and 80s. He's just kind of a hired gun, but he happens to be fucking gifted, as most
absolutely
are, I guess.
No, the film was well staged, well shot, and like also the girls looked beautiful. I mean, it was a very enjoyable watch for me. Like I didn't enjoy watching the kids in Bay of Blood because they were all gross. Like I didn't think any of those kids, they were all bad looking people. Like that's that's not wrong criticism, right? I mean, like this is Hollywood, baby.
And again, Fulci. Well, no, Fulci. God, I'm doing it. Bava's thing, of course, like we said earlier, is that he isn't using sex to be like, oh, let's titillate the audience some more. No, his idea is that fuck it, we're just gonna use this as what are horny teens gonna do in a dune buggy? Trespass and fuck on the fucking couch. Who knows?
Yeah, right. Run around, grab stuff. Yeah.
My only other comments on this is number one, I like that we also had an identifiable villain though for the movie, like we did in Crystal Plumage, where we had Crystal Plumage. We had the man in black who didn't turn out to be a man, but regardless, this one we have the guy wearing the what do you call it, ski mask or whatever over his head. He had a distinctive look to be a character,
and it's a very creepy look too, because it's not just and it's not just the fine Italian leather gloves. It's that they're driving gloves.
Yes,
and that you have that the eye holes are barely slits. The mouth is barely a slit. It's very, very freaky to look at, and some of those shots where they catch the light on the blade are just fantastic.
That and just the guys in the movie looked very similar to me, and I was losing track of who was who.
There is a lot of
when the one guy shows up at the door to the mansion where the girls are staying, and he's been killed, and he has the scarf around his neck, and I'm like, is that the professor? Like totally.
No, he was the creepy guy.
He was the stalker who was with the hooker. Earlier in the movie, but.
Yeah, which
it's like what? Okay.
Yeah, Yeah.
I mean, well, there's your scene of impotence, Ryan. There you go.
That is the impotent scene. That's the impotent scene.
Yes, there's the impotent lead of the giallo.
Literally.
Exactly. The impotent lead of the giallo made a side character / red hair.
But that was very Scream too, of like open the door, like, oh, the red herring guy is out in the door. Remember that great scene in Scream where we have the two guys yelling? He did it. I saw it. That's a favorite of mine. I love Scream. But it really just is an American. That's a giallo film. But right?
I'd say so structurally, yeah. Because I mean, there are a few films 100%. That I keep hearing that get thrown around. I know Dressed to Kill, Brian De Palma's Dressed to Kill. I know people have considered it an American giallo. I think a lot of that's purely in the whole black glove disguised killer and all of that. And I heard Eyes of Laura Mars.
Definitely, for sure.
Yeah.
The
Eyes of Laura Mars.
And I definitely see it because what you have there is an example of that bizarre structure, or rather the conceit of it, that strange psychic link with the killer. That is very much that is very much in the spirit of a giallo.
It's an extreme POV in that film, yeah.
Yeah, exactly, because you have this idea of mental recall and trying to piece together elements within the mind, really. So I can definitely see the case for those. Scream as giallo, I think, is an interesting idea, and I think that's definitely something I might explore once I sit down and watch them, like all together. I think it also, the problem though is that it also gets buried under the whole meta commentary thing, where it's like, okay, how many times are we gonna feel clever about ourselves with this conceit?
But like you have
only up to 4. That's my opinion.
Pretty much.
The new ones.
I haven't seen any of the new ones. I haven't seen them.
Yeah,
I haven't seen them.
4
was the last one I saw.
4 is good. 4 is good. It's Wes Craven, it's still good. 5 and 6 are absolute garbage. I absolutely hate those movies.
Well, I heard they killed Deputy Dewey,
right?
Which you can't.
Yeah,
come on.
They do in number 5. Yeah,
come on.
And then they didn't want to pay Neve Campbell for 6, so she's not in it.
Oh, bummer. But no, I overall I liked Torso. I appreciated what it was doing.
I liked all 4 of these movies for
all
sure.
All these movies were good. Yeah, these were all good.
Sliding scale.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
If they're just like if we're gonna use number ratings, which I'm starting to be really I kind of agree with Coppola's whole thing. Is like, do we call the Taj Mahal? Is the Taj Mahal 4 out of 5 stars? Like, I'm at that point with number ratings. But literally,
that was
just going off like my letter. That was a great fucking clip. But going off like my Letterboxd numbers, none of these went below 4 out of 5. I genuinely recommend all of these, and they're great examples of the giallo for different reasons. There is Bird with the Crystal Plumage as an archetypical giallo. There are the elements of the slasher in Bay of Blood and Torso, and there's also, if we want to be pretentious and say the elevated giallo. Every time I hear elevated again, I'm just throw me out the window, please. Don't Torture a Duckling is, like I said, it's not just genre fare. It is a genuine, really rock solid thriller, regardless of whatever the hell you call it. It's just a rock solid fucking film.
And I would say that Don't Torture a Duckling doesn't have a real exploitative element to it that is
not at all
pronounced.
It feels it's very much an artfully done piece, very much so.
Right. Well, Jake, I think you did an awesome job curating for us, because you could have gone with the staples and it would have been rather predictable, but I've really been pleased with our conversation here tonight. I think we had a good talk. You're clearly a wealth of information. You're welcome back anytime. I was actually working on a script to do a review of Tenebrae. And if you wouldn't mind, I'd like to reach out to you and like have you fact check it, or, throw out some more recommendations. There have been a million recommendations thrown out all night long. We need to put a bibliography together for people if they're watching.
Honestly, we might have to go over the VOD and be like, list that.
I think we do. Because I obviously you're incredibly knowledgeable, and we've really appreciated having you on. And this was a great show. So, and in the chat too, sorry, chat, we didn't really get to the chat this time because there wasn't really a dull moment in our conversation. So
I completely abducted George and Ryan for a full 2 hours 20.
Yeah, dude. We were your vice, and only you had the key, bro. We were locked up. But I had a great time. And we have some great recommendations: a dragonfly for each corpse, Eye of the Labyrinth. Like, we've got a very educated audience here. I appreciate it. But Jake, thanks.
A lot of good names too.
Thanks for coming on. I wish we could go longer. I'd love to, but it's Friday night. I have to take my wife out on a date. I'm so sorry. But it's
crime of the age.
What's that?
Said crime of the age.
I know. I wish we could do more, talk about Megalopolis, but it's been a lot of fun, guys, and everybody in the audience. Thanks so much for tuning in, and we will see you next time.
Godspeed.